Today we are going to be annotating a short story. This short story is called named Nombres by Julia Alvarez. I do apologize. My Midwestern accent is not going to allow me to pronounce everything correctly. And the reason it's already written all over is because I took a screenshot of what I did with my students already this morning. So up here I have a post-it note kind of with our key for annotating. And I have this key in my previous video explaining kind of how you even begin where to annotate. So if you want to use that video first to kind of go over everything, I'll have it linked below. Otherwise, once you've watched that, this is good practice. We'll walk through everything. And again, I apologize because it's a little messy. It was written on my smartboard, and everyone knows that they are a little difficult to work on. So again, this is Names Nombres by Julia Alvarez. Great short story about a young girl and her family moving to the United States from the Dominican Republic and really trying to adjust to life. So when we arrived in New York City, our names changed almost immediately. At immigration, the officer asked my father, Mr. Alvarez, if he had anything to declare. My father shook his head no, and we were waved through. I was too afraid that we wouldn't be let in if I corrected the man's punctuation. But I said her name to myself, opening my mouth wide for an organ blast of an A, trilling my tongue for the drummel of the R, Alvarez. How could anyone get Albers out of the orchestra of that sound? So the other thing we're looking for are the 5 W's. Who, what, when, where, and why. So when we arrive in New York City, our names changed almost immediately. So our question was, who is we? Who is our name? So who's we? And then why are they in New York City? Why did they have to go to New York City? So why are they there? And who's we? Who is our? At immigration, the officer asked my father, Mr. Alvarez, which I'm now trying to pronounce it how someone would butcher it since we know she doesn't like how it sounds, Mr. Alvarez, if he had anything to declare. My father shook his head no, and we were waved through. So we know that it's at least a father and his child. We know that it's a daughter because my class has read the story before, but a lot of people then would just assume it would be a child, girl or boy. So we know that they arrived in New York City and they're immigrants. So they came from another country. So looking at the last name and the pronunciations, we can assume it is a country somewhere in Central or Southern America. It turns out eventually that she comes from the Dominican Republic. We know that she's not from the USA. She says that she was afraid to correct the man's punctuation or pronunciation. And so we have to assume that she's young because typically adults don't like to be corrected. Well, typically adults don't like to be corrected, but they especially do not like to be corrected by children or teenagers because then it makes them feel silly. It makes them feel stupid. So we can assume that since he would be mad at her for correcting him, she must be young. And then we also unfortunately, a common issue in America is a lot of Americans don't like to be proven wrong by someone different than them. So that's another reminder of why we know that she's definitely from another country. So next paragraph. At the hotel, my mother, Mrs. Alvarez, again, we can see the pronunciation is changing again. And I was little girl, as in, hey, little girl, stop riding the elevator down. It's not a toy. So here we find out, yes, she is young, and she is, in fact, a she because it's a little girl. So once again, their names are changing. It's different from up here. Since the little girl, Julia, rides the elevator up and down, we can assume that she's kind of viewing it as a toy. So either her country is poor or she herself comes from poverty because many American children that grew up in major cities would not view an elevator as a toy. In fact, many people fear it. They don't want to get in one. So for her to enjoy it means she's never seen one or been in one, and that's typically going to be in a lower poverty country. We moved into our new apartment building. The super called my father Mr. Alvarez, and the neighbors who became my mother's friends pronounced her name Julia instead of Julia. Her namesake, was known as Julita at home, but at school I was Judy or Judith, and once an English teacher mistook me for Juliet. So once again, their last name has a new pronunciation, a new spelling, and her neighbors who became her mother's friends didn't even take the time to learn how to pronounce her name as Julia. Instead, they called her the American version of Julia. And Julia, I wasn't even saying it wrong, should be pronounced Julita, but at school she's Judy or Judith or Juliet. So here we can infer that they're really losing their identity, and that the family, once they moved to New York City, they lost their cultural identity that they once had in the Dominican Republic. So even though there's a lot of good things that have happened, there's lots of bad as well. So for the who, Julia and her family. The what, they moved there and adjusting to life. When, we're not 100% sure yet. I bet we figure that out as we keep reading. Where, we know New York City. And why, since this is only the beginning, we still do not know why they moved there, but we can assume, make an inference that they moved there to get a better life since they were probably coming from poverty.